Greetings, crew of the Ranger. Welcome to the first episode of Sci-Fi Navigator. I'm your host, Prime, and with me is my co-host and sidekick,
Fohammer. We are very excited to bring our first episode to you.
That's right. Sci-Fi Navigator is something that I've wanted to do for a while, and it's a thrill that you are watching. Creating the show has taken some time, and it hasn't always been easy, but Fohammer and I hope it's something that you will enjoy.
There have been some late nights and some occasional headaches as well, but we're here now, so I'd say that we definitely pulled it off.
We certainly have, and we can't wait to get into our discussion about today's Stargate episode, Children of the Gods. But before we get into it, what are your thoughts so far on the first tour of 2285, Fo?
Well, so far this tour's been pretty tedious. Bravo is definitely itching for some action, but you can't fly while we're at FTL either, so I can't imagine it's been fun for you. Speaking of which, Prime, are we at Cigaris yet?
Considering we're still at FTL, I would say no. At current speed, though, providing we don't have to make any course corrections, the Cigaris sector is about a week away.
So there's about a week and a half before we see any real action then. I suppose Bravo will have to double down on training Assistant Science Officer Purcell in hand-to-hand combat. That way we don't have a repeat encounter like last August on Mars.
I still can't believe you talked Dr. Purcell into going with you to rest in peace. Marvin may not let us back now. And that was during our Show the Flag cruise right before the tour ended. You could have cost us our entire shore leave. 2284 was a rough year. I would not have been happy if we ended up scrubbing plasma conduits the entire time Ranger was going through refit.
Well, I could be a very persuasive individual at times, and the potential scrubbings were worth seeing the good doctor learn some first-hand physics. At least we didn't leave any lasting damage.
As much as I enjoy reminiscing about good times, we have a show to do. Stargate Sg1 was created for television by Jonathan Glassner and Brad Wright, based on the film by Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin. It ran for 10 seasons, from 1997 to 2006. The first 5 seasons were on Showtime. After Showtime canceled the show, the Sci-Fi Channel picked it up for the rest of its run. There were 2 direct-to-video movies, Stargate Arc of Truth and Stargate Continuum, both from 2008. The primary cast is Richard Dean Anderson as Jack O'Neill, Michael Shanks as Daniel Jackson, Amanda Tapping as Sam Carter, and Christopher Judge as Teal'c. So, Fohammer, what are your thoughts on Stargate SG-1 in general? What do you like about it? Are there things that you don't like about it? Give us a little bit of background.
SG-1 represents a lot of different ideas rolled into one show. We see a diverse set of topics from exploration to social issues, exploration to emotion. There's no one thing that SG-1 explores, and I enjoy that about the series.
Sure.
But because they do so much, they kind of lose some of the depth that they could go in certain topics. SG-1 is not a show specifically about politics. It is not a show specifically about psychology or medicine or any of these other topics. They are just represented in the show. I got into SG-1 as a kid, and growing up, I always loved watching it. So it always brings a sense of nostalgia back when I watch it again.
For sure. What got you into it as a kid?
Well, my mother watched it with me. She was very into science fiction, and we just started watching it and couldn't stop.
Very nice.
What about you? What are some things that you think SG-1 does well and poorly?
Sure, SG-1 is really good at its development. It's one of the best shows, I feel, that develops its universe and really creates a world, creates an entire universe. Whereas a show like Star Trek, which I absolutely love, there's a lot of characters, races, and things like that are one and done. They show up for one episode, we never hear about them again. That's not really the case for SG-1. If you meet a character or if you meet a race, chances are they're going to show up in at least one more episode. And I love that because it feels like a well thought out universe. You're right about the multiple stories that it tells. That is absolutely a good thing that I agree with. All the different kind of subjects it tackles, and which can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. Like you mentioned, it doesn't go all that in depth in certain areas. But it also doesn't get stuck in a certain area as well. It can move past it and be like a different show the next week. Kind of similar to Star Trek in that way. Although it's a bit more of a continuing storyline, I guess, than some of the other Star Treks.
Star Trek was designed to be easier to pick up. This is designed to have a plot line that's developing and changing over time.
Right.
So I know exactly what you mean.
Anything else you want to add?
I think that covers SG1 in general.
All right, getting on to the episode, Stargate Sg1 Episode 1, Children of the Gods, which first aired July 27th, 1997. It was written by Jonathan Glassner and Brad Wright, directed by Mario Azzopardi. As we're beginning the episode, it starts out with a poker game that some of the airmen are having. There's several men and a woman, actually. They're taking a break, hiding, apparently, because they make a crack about not wanting an officer or someone to find them, which, you know, if an officer did, for some reason, go down there, I don't know why they would in the first place. They probably wouldn't say much anyway, other than get back to work, and then they would go talk to your senior NCO, and then you would get, stern talking to from your senior NCO. What did you think about the poker game scene?
Well, I mean, if any of my men were playing poker and it was a duty day, I would be kind of mad. I wouldn't get overly angry at them. I would just kind of give them a stern talking to. So I'm not sure why they were hiding in the first place. If they're on lunch break, you can really do whatever you want. If you're, coming from PT, going to your duty shift, you're more than welcome to do whatever you want in that time as long as you're ready for work. I'm not sure why they decided to hide.
It seems like they were hiding. They mentioned that the place is getting shut down, like they're moving people and personnel out. So maybe they just didn't have a lot to do.
And that's a very fair assumption. We can only assume what they were doing because it's never outright said.
Right. So anyway, the gate starts to become active. It's moving around, it starts shaking. And it shakes the room, it seems like, because like their table starts to shake a bit. I did notice, which, doesn't really seem to be a thing later on in the show. Like the gate itself will rattle, but it doesn't really disturb the room itself. That was kind of interesting. But the gate opens, and we get the first reveal of the gate opening in the series. And out from the gate comes this kind of ball thing. We're not entirely sure what it is. Do you remember when you first saw it? Did you have any kind of thought about what it was?
I thought it was a grenade.
Yeah, that's kind of what it looks like, right? But it does not explode. When the female airman starts to walk toward it, everyone's like, "What are you doing? Get away from it," which seems like a natural thing to do, like don't mess with it. Yeah, she comes up to it, picks it up, and starts to examine it, and apparently it starts to scan her. This beam shoots out of it and kind of like sweeps across her body. Doesn't affect her any. We don't know exactly what it is. After that, we start to see these troops walk through, wearing their elaborate serpent garb, the serpent Jaffa of Apophis, and they make their first appearance. They basically begin to attack. And I did notice the first time a staff weapon is fired, completely misses.
And the first round fired by a projectile weapon is a hit.
It is, and it has no effect. The weapons at the beginning, zero effect. After a bit of a firefight, where guys get killed on both sides, they do manage to take out some of the Jaffa, even though like the bullets are shown to be bouncing off. Apophis, he's the main bad guy, grabs the female airman. They go out through the gate. And there's a bit of a problem with that, isn't there, Fohammer?
There is no dialing device to leave Earth. They should have been stuck there.
They have no way to dial out. Later on, they mentioned they could manually dial the gate, but it's not shown they manually dial the gate in this episode. Kind of a goof.
And if it was anything other than plot armor for Apophis and Teal, it would have been game over right there. They had a one-way gate. There's nothing they should have been able to do. But
right,
that doesn't tell a very good story.
No, it doesn't.
So I'm willing to forgive it.
There's a bit of a standoff because General Hammond shows up with some reinforcements. They kind of stop the firefight. Each side kind of goes back to doing their own thing. And then after the title sequence, we see our first appearance in the show of Colonel Jack O'Neill.
With 2 L's.
Yes. Spelled differently from the movie, which is an interesting change. A lot of things changed. We did mention that in our commentary, that Jack O'Neill is a bit of a different character than he is in the movie, which was a good change. I'm not going to complain about that. Jack O'Neill, when we first meet him, he's up on top of the roof of his house, stargazing, looking at his telescope.
Which is a very interesting nod that they brought back from the movie Stargate. Colonel O'Neill was known to be something of an amateur astronomer, so they added that into this episode, and it was a very good nod.
Right, and also kind of goes to his experiences of actually not really traveling through space, but traveling to a different planet.
He believes that all of the action will be taking place in NASA, which is demonstrably false.
Right.
The Air Force is the one that takes the lead in this case.
Because when we first meet Major Samuels, Colonel O'Neill tells him, yeah, you should go to NASA because everything's going to be happening over there in space.
And little does anybody know, other than the people who know about the Stargate program, there's a portal to other planets that makes even the most advanced rockets pale in comparison.
Right, yeah, completely useless.
Completely changes the dynamics of interstellar travel and physics as was known at the time.
Yeah, it should be basically its own field of science that opens up based on the Stargate technology.
And eventually it is mentioned that wormhole physics is an entire branch of science that's new. But that's later on.
Right. Anyway, Major Samuels is there to recall Jack O'Neill, to bring him back to talk to General Hammond about the situation that has just occurred. So they go back to NORAD. The first meeting between General Hammond and Colonel O'Neill happens because General Hammond was not actually in the movie. He's a brand new character for the show.
He replaces General West, who was in the movie. And General Hammond does some pretty unbecoming things of an officer. He threatens to nuke an entire world in order to get information from Jack and Jack's compatriots, Kowalski and who was the other guy?
Peretti.
Perfect. So Peretti and Kowalski don't tell them anything, even before they knew that the planet was going to be nuked, and they refuse to say anything after they find out as well. Colonel Jack O'Neill, retired, then spills the beans and says, well, we didn't actually detonate the nuke on the planet. They blew up Ra's spaceship, which was in orbit at the time. This leads to a bit of a tense moment between General Hammond and Colonel O'Neill.
Because at this point in the show, they think that the Stargate only goes to one place, Abydos. So they're under the impression that the intruders came through the gate from Abydos. Colonel O'Neill was ordered to destroy the gate on the Abydos end, which doesn't happen. Because as he explains, he doesn't want to kill the people on the planet. It's understandable. And we mentioned in the commentary that General Hammond has his own reasons for sending the bomb through as well. Not necessarily a right or wrong answer in this case, depending on how you look at it, depending on the arguments you want to make. It could be argued either way. But Hammond does decide he is not going to send the nuke through.
After some finagling with Peretti, Kowalski, and Colonel O'Neill.
Right.
Later, we see a briefing on what's happening, and Colonel O'Neill picks up a box of tissues. They make the decision that they're going to dial the Abdojian gate and send it through as a message, which is one of the smarter decisions made in this episode. They don't have to wait for the MELP to be shipped from MIT. It's heavily assumed it's the MELP that we see later on. They call it a probe. We do see that Colonel O'Neill walks up to the gate after it's been dialed to the Abdojian gate, and he throws the tissue box through. This is because it is a message to Jackson.
Right. Jackson has pretty severe allergies at this point in the show.
And it would mean almost nothing to anybody else, but Jackson, who is a resident of Earth, knows what a box of Kleenex are.
Although I have to say, thinking about it, if I got a box of tissues and I was on basically a Stone Age or maybe Bronze Age society, I probably wouldn't be using it on the tissues on my nose. I'd probably be using it somewhere else.
Yeah, we also see them give the same Stone Age level technology military grade weapons, because that's a smart idea.
Yeah, they know it's a message, so they wait a while. The gate reopens. The tissue box gets thrown through and written on it. I don't know what it's written on. Maybe he had a pen or a magic marker or something like that somewhere. We don't know. But on the box is written,
it says, "Thanks, send more."
So with that, we know that Daniel Jackson is alive and well. O'Neill wants to go through the gate, wants to see what's on the other side. From there,
they have a briefing at 0800,
where we get introduced to another member of the team.
Dr. Samantha Carter, as she is referred to. She is a captain in the Air Force, however, and does not like the term doctor.
At least when she's talking to other military personnel, she prefers her rank, which is captain.
She shows herself to be a very capable and very adept warrior.
That will be developed more as the show goes along. We get a little bit of backstory on her, what she's been doing. She transferred from the Pentagon. She is a theoretical astrophysicist. She's very brilliant. Samantha Carter, or Sam, as she likes to be called, was part of the team that was trying to figure out how to use the gate before Daniel Jackson came in and figured out how to use it in the movie. And they've been working on it for a long time. She'd been actively working on it for at least 2 years before the movie.
Yes, she had been working on it for 2 years before the movie, which brings it to a total of 3 years, as this episode is set 1 year after the movie.
Major Samuels is also part of the briefing, and he suggests they should just do what the Egyptians did, and they should bury the gate, so that no one can go through it. But, as Colonel O'Neill points out, it's not really an option, because the Goa'uld have spaceships, they have starships, so they can just fly to Earth if they need to. He calls it the old-fashioned way, which is a great way of putting it. I particularly like that line.
I do as well.
He suggests using the gate for reconnaissance purposes, and that's a far better way to use the gate to find other civilizations, planets, and things like that, possible technologies. That's kind of what the show ends up being.
It's a very intelligent use of the gate. You don't want to fight the dragon when it's in your town. You want to fight the dragon in its lair.
Exactly. With Jack O'Neill being returned to active duty, Colonel, once again, he is put in charge of the team, which includes Sam Carter, Kowalski, Ferretti are going to go through as well. A couple of other random guys. If it was Star Trek, the original series, they'd be wearing red shirts.
Yep. Only in this series, they don't die like red shirts do.
Oh, yeah, they do. Didn't those guys die?
2 of them died.
Yeah, later on in the episode. They suit up. They end up going through the gate to Abaddon, which in the movie was in a completely different galaxy. But in the series, they changed it as part of the Milky Way.
Yes, and part of that can be chalked up to the fact that in the movie, they had no idea what the hell they were getting into.
So they go through the gate, and there are a bunch of Abadonians waiting for them for some reason. And there's a momentarily bit of a standoff, raise some tensions. It dies down quickly because Daniel Jackson is there as well. They have a nice reunion. Colonel O'Neill gets a nice reunion scene with a character from the movie called Skara.
And it's probably the most touching moment in the entire episode. In the movie, Skara was given a lighter by Colonel O'Neill. And it's the same lighter that is being returned to him by Skara. And O'Neill says, "No, I gave that to you to keep." And we see that even as a Goa'uld, Skara keeps that lighter. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
They have a believable moment that they're friends, that they've known each other, even though they never really knew each other that long, but there was a strong bond formed from combat, and O'Neill kind of looking at him like his son, because he had recently lost his son in the movie. That will be followed up on a little more later in season 1.
Yes.
So they're trying to figure out where these aliens came from that attacked Earth. And Daniel Jackson says that they did not come from Abaddon because they guard the Stargate.
Which raises an interesting question. If there's only 2 Stargates, and they didn't come from Abaddon, and they obviously didn't come from the Stargate that they were attacking, where did they come from?
Yes, and Daniel has a theory on that he's going to get to, but at the moment, there is a sandstorm, so they kind of have to hang out where they are. They decide to have dinner, and we get a nice little character moment where we get some more
development
between the characters. Nice little moments. But once the storm does clear, which doesn't take a lot of time in the episode, they end up following Daniel to this big, what essentially is a map room. Tell us a little bit about this map room, Bellhammer.
On the walls of the room, we see hieroglyphs, and it's asked, what does it say? And Daniel says it doesn't say anything. And then he goes on and explains that it's all of the symbols of the gate, and it's instructions on how to use it, more or less.
The symbols are grouped in 7 symbols, which represents coordinates. Talking to Sam, she's still skeptical. She doesn't think that there's any way that the gate can dial anywhere else, can go to any other planet. She's convinced, because having spent so much time working on the gate, that there's just no way it goes anywhere else. Daniel mentions that maybe the addresses are offset because of stellar drift, because when the map was created, it was thousands of years ago, in which time the stars had moved apart. And that gives Sam the brilliant idea that that's exactly what's the problem is, and she can create a computer program that will account for this drift. And they will be able to get new coordinates, new sets of symbols based on adjusting for the stellar drift. The only reason why, at least in her mind, the gate only goes to Abdos is because it's the closest gate to Earth.
Which is a very good theory, because there would be less stellar drift between Earth and Abydos as opposed to the other side of the galaxy.
Right. Basically, they come to the conclusion that the Stargate can travel across the entire galaxy. There's probably a network that spans the galaxy. And with these coordinates, they can go who knows where.
Anywhere. And at the time, it's assumed that it's just the Milky Way, which it's an immense amount of gates that would be seeded all over the place. There would have to be millions of them.
So after that scene, we get a scene where the gate starts dialing again.
Only this time, it's not from Earth. Abydos is attacked by the same aliens that attacked Earth.
Which, thinking about it, it's kind of weird why they would just start dialing gates now, why they thought about dialing the Earth gate. But at the same time, it kind of makes sense, though, if Abydos and Earth are so close together, that maybe they had a list of addresses they were dialing through, and the Abydos gate was just the next one on the list.
And it could also be that they were trying to determine if Ra was still alive or not, as Ra was not very well connected for being a system lord.
Possibly, but they could have just contacted him on his ship.
That's also true.
There's an attack, there's a big battle that happens, kind of is a repeat of the earlier battle, where Apophis and his Jaffa just kind of clean house. But this time, Daniel's wife, Sharae, gets abducted, as well as Skara.
And Ferretti remembers the address that was dialed.
Yes, which we did mention. They found out that there is a device that's generally around the gates that lets them enter the different symbols to select where they want the gate to dial. The Earth gate that they found in Egypt, they didn't have this, so they had to create an entire system using a computer to dial the gate. This one has it. And Ferretti, even though he's wounded, he's bleeding pretty badly and pretty messed up. He's able to remember the gate sequence to dial to go to where the attackers had gone.
After the attack, they return back to Earth relatively quickly, as there's quite a few casualties.
They bring Daniel Jackson with them.
Yes, they do bring Daniel Jackson back with them. Ferretti is given immediate medical attention.
When we get back to Earth, we see that there's been some maintenance done on the Stargate. What have they done to the Stargate while we've been watching our characters on Abydos?
They put a titanium blast shield that can retract and deploy into place to prevent unwanted access.
Yes, they call it the Iris.
Yes.
Which will be part of the show for the rest of the run.
They do change it and modify it later, but it is still the same tried and true Iris that was put in this first episode.
So Ferretti gets taken to the medical bay, the medical ward, sick bay, whatever you want to call it. Basically, they're released. And Daniel Jackson is distraught because his wife is gone. Also, his brother-in-law, because Skara is actually Sharae's brother. So they're taken. He has no idea what's going to happen. He wants to go on the team to follow where the attackers have gone through, where the Jaffa have gone to. General Hammond tells him that, you're not in position to ask anything.
And that's a fair point. Dr. Jackson's been gone for over a year and just now came back.
There's a nice character moment. Jack takes Daniel back to his house to try and cheer him up. They have a beer. We get a little more backstory. Talk a little bit about why Daniel feels the things he does for Sharae. We learned that Jack O'Neill's wife left him shortly after he came back after the events of the movie. It's a nice moment where we just get some interaction between these two characters.
Yes, it is a very touching moment. We see Colonel O'Neill's emotional side kind of shine through a little bit, where he comforts Daniel a little bit.
Which is a nice leadership trait to have. Look out for the morale of your guys.
They have to feel welcome, and they have to know that you don't absolutely hate their guts.
Right? Although he does make fun of him quite a bit for his scientific skills and things like that. He knows that he's useful. He knows that he'd be a good part of the team.
And at the end of the day, we see that they are good friends.
The good thing to watch is their development and the adventures they go on, how they feel for each other after they've been through all this. All right, from that scene, we shift over to the planet where the Jaffa had come from. And Apophis, the big bad guy, there's a room full of basically his harem. He's got all these women. We see the female from the beginning of the episode. She is there as well.
And she gets taken by the Jaffa again.
Apophis uses his gold hand device to do some kind of scan on her. She could be the vessel for his future queen, but it's not his decision.
And after that, we see his future queen, currently housed in a Jaffa, in the belly pouch, come out into light. And it is the first time we see a Goa'uld in the episode, in the series, actually.
Yeah, it's the first time on screen we ever see a true Goa'uld, the true form of the Goa'uld.
Which is a snake-like creature with wings, basically.
But she's not chosen, so she is unceremoniously taken out.
By the same hand device.
Which leads Apophis to demand another. But we cut from there. We go back to Earth, where there's a top secret meeting going on. All our characters are there, all around their sweet conference table. They're trying to figure out what's going on, who these guys are, what they could be doing. Daniel speculates that he could be another member of Ra's race, that maybe he wasn't the last of his race because he took on the role of an Egyptian god. And there were multiple Egyptian gods, so there could still be more of these gods out there. General Hammond has said that he's got orders from the president where he is authorized to form 9 top secret teams to travel through the gate to perform reconnaissance missions, determine threats, and if possible, make peaceful contact with other races. O'Neill's team is, of course, designated SG1. Kowalski will lead SG2. So they're given a mission to go through the gate to the address the attackers went through, because once Ferretti regains consciousness, he is able to enter the symbols that he witnessed Apophis entering. So they're going to go through the gate to find out anything they can. Their primary mission is to gather any kind of intelligence they can. If they can, they're supposed to rescue any captured people. But that's not their primary mission.
And to be fair, they don't know that there's a ton of captured people at this point. They think it's only Sheree and Scar.
Right. They are given special transmitters that will send out a code that will allow them to open the iris. They're going to close the iris if any wormholes try and open, unless they give a specific code to open the iris.
General Hammond also states that they have 24 hours before they are locked out and unable to return to Earth, which is basically a death sentence for anybody stuck on the other side of the gate.
Yeah, that's a bad situation to be in, because General Hammond doesn't just say that they're not coming back. He says that the iris is going to be sealed permanently.
Welded shut.
Which means no one's going through. So from there, we cut back to Apophis. And he is once again looking for a vessel for his future queen. This time, Sheree has been picked. The Goa'uld inside the female Jaffa accepts Sheree as the new vessel. So the Goa'uld gets implanted into Sheree. So she's no longer in control of her body. She's essentially a different character.
Entirely. She's a spectator to the Goa'uld that inhabits her body.
Which would be a terrible fate. It would be so bad to go through something like that. Could you imagine that?
You have no control over anything you do, and you have to watch horrible things being committed. It would be the worst thing you could possibly experience. And not just watch, but you feel all of the emotions.
Yeah.
You feel like you're committing these acts. And it is hard to separate the person from the acts. And we see that in a couple of cases. Some of these hosts enjoy it.
That's right. Back in the gate room, they're getting ready to go through for their mission. SG1 is the primary team. SG2 is their backup. So Kowalski's bringing his team with him. Daniel Jackson, he is part of SG1 now as well. So he was given permission to join the team. They end up going through the gate. There's a bunch of stones around the gate, little forest area, which leads Daniel Jackson to believe that the gate is important to these people. It's some kind of religious artifact that is part of their religion, which O'Neill dismisses right out of hand. He's like, yeah, whatever. Let's just get on with our mission. They head out from there. Almost immediately, you run into a group of, I guess they're priests. They take cover, hiding in the bushes while these guys come through. But Daniel, he just kind of walks out. He's like, hey, everybody.
Hey, you guys.
Much to the chagrin of O'Neill, who is a military man first, always thinks of his gun first, not that gun, but his actual gun. Daniel has a good point, though, that they don't want to start shooting at the first people they see.
And it turns out to be the right choice. Jackson is able to understand most of what these priests are saying. It's a totally different language. It's Arabic mixed with something else.
Right.
So Jackson mentions the Chappa Eye or the Stargate, and these priests immediately think that he is a god.
Because only the gods go through the Stargate.
And their servants.
Right.
However, these aren't dressed like Jaffa, so they have to be Goa'uld. They are asked a very specific question: would you like to choose?
They don't know what that means, but they say, yeah, we can choose. They lead them to basically this, it's not really a temple. I guess it's kind of a temple. It's not really a temple. It kind of looks like just like some kind of like banquet hall. There's a group of people all there. They're having this banquet and enjoying themselves. And then all of a sudden, who enters? It's Apophis and his entourage of Jaffa. And with him is
Sharai.
So Daniel, not knowing the situation, just rushes out to try and save her or whatever he's thinking. He's just full of emotion, wants his wife back. Little does he know,
she's been taken.
Daniel and the rest of our guys, the rest of SG1, get thrown in the dungeon.
And there's roughly, I'd say, about 100 other people with them, including Skara. Teal'c eventually comes up to them and notices something on O'Neill's wrist, specifically his watch.
Yeah, he's got a digital watch.
This is not Goa'uld technology. The Jaffa are unaware of any form of advanced technology that is not created by the Goa'uld, which is interesting as they're given staff weapons and armor, and they're told that these are gifts from the gods. False gods.
No one else has anything like this unless they got it from the Goa'uld. That is an eye-opener for him, for sure.
And we see Teal'c's fascination with other objects that are not made by the Goa'uld, such as the rifles used by the SG teams and airmen.
At this point, he's just looking for any kind of chance, any kind of hope that someone out there can stand up to the Goa'uld. Through this whole episode, whenever the Goa'uld have been doing stuff that's appalling, stuff that's terrible, you can see it in his face. He looks like he is not on board with it at all.
We see the signs of him wanting to rebel against the Goa'uld, but never having a means to do so.
Right.
And we hear it in some of his words when he tells Skara, "Your death cannot help her," referring to Sharai.
Skara tries to save Sharai from being taken by Apophis. There's no way he's going to be able to stop that. So not only does Teal'c ask him about his watch, he also asks him where he's from. And of course, he doesn't know anything about Earth. He wouldn't know where Earth was or what that even means.
We see Daniel draw the point of origin, which is a triangle with a circle over top of it. It is the origin point of all human life in the Milky Way.
Apophis comes into the cell with his guards, and Skara says they're here to choose the children of the gods. And it's not really explained. We don't really know who the children of the gods are, or what kind of vessel would make a good host for a children of the god, or gods. But that's what they're going to do. They're going to go through this group of people and decide who they want.
And this was the choosing that was referred to earlier by the priests. So we see different factions of the Goa'uld in the harem go through and start picking people out of this crowd of about 100 or so until they get to our heroes. Daniel Jackson begs to be chosen and asks, "Will I remember anything? Something of the host must survive." And we see another human moment with Teal'c where he shakes his head, says no.
Although we know this is not true, but as far as he knows, probably is true. Because I don't think he would ever have seen any kind of host Goa'uld that had their parasite removed. So as far as he knows, I'm sure that he fully believes what he's saying, that no.
We see somebody holding Dr. Jackson back, Skara. And they see that Skara is being courageous in the face of an enemy that he knows nothing about, not this intimately anyway, and shows very little, if any, fear. And so they pick him instead.
To be one of the children of the gods.
Colonel O'Neill flips out, Sam is very angry, and Dr. Jackson is almost in tears at this point. And then we hear an order from Apophis. Kill them all.
Him and his guys, they leave. He wants everyone dead. And they're about to, the Jaffa Serpent Guards, they're about to kill everyone. Teal'c, who had witnessed this entire exchange, Colonel O'Neill, he calls out to Teal'c and pleads with him, "Help me save these people. I can save these people." And Teal'c says back to him, "I've heard that many times from people, but you're the first person I believe who could actually do it." So he shoots one of the Serpent Guards, throws his staff weapon to O'Neill and grabs the dead Serpent Guard's staff weapon And then they attack the rest of the Serpent Guards. And there's a big firefight with all the Serpent Guards. People get shot left and right. But they're eventually victorious. All the Serpent Guards are dead. They blow a hole in the side of the dungeon so that all the people can escape. And O'Neill calls out to Teal'c. He says, "Come with us." And Teal'c says to him, distraught, he says, "I have nowhere else to go." And O'Neill says, "For this, you can stay with me." They get out of there. They head back towards the Stargate. And on their way back to the Stargate, Teal'c starts to give a little bit of backstory. He is a Jaffa. And what the Jaffa means is they are the people who carry the infant Goa'uld. They carry them inside their stomach as they grow and mature. What he gets for carrying the infant Goa'uld is he gets perfect health and extra long life. And if he removes it, he will eventually die. In this first episode, it kind of implies that maybe he might live forever with the Goa'uld because he says he'll eventually die later on. We find out that for most of them, it's within hours. So he keeps it with him.
While they are heading to the Stargate, we see a scene where all of the Goa'uld and their escorts leave the planet.
With them is Skara. And Teal'c says to O'Neill, Skara is no longer the boy he knows. He's a host to a Goa'uld. He's got the glowing eyes, the whole shebang. But O'Neill's still got to try something. What does he do?
He rushes him, calling his name, pleading with him to remember who he was. Skara responds by raising his hand device and pushing O'Neill back with energy before departing through the gate, which cuts off.
Above, the Jaffa start to attack.
And we see that they have emplaced claymores and other explosive devices to slow the advance. And we see two of the SG members holding off what they claim is a battalion-sized element, or approximately 1,000 soldiers.
Which we really don't see.
Yeah, we only see roughly 150 Jaffa.
SG2 has prepared the area for an attack. They're kind of ready for some action. The Goa'uld had flown to the Stargate in a big ship. Looks like a big death glider, which we haven't seen proper death gliders in the series yet. But they drop down with the transport rings. The ship begins to blast them from the air. The SG teams are prepared for this. Kowalski has a shoulder-mounted air-to-air missile, which they use to shoot down the big death glider before it can really do any damage. After they shoot down the big death glider ship, there's a second wave of Jaffa coming in. There's even more of a firefight this time. They basically let all of their toys go with the claymores and all their guns. They're shooting up this group of Jaffa.
There's even a guy throwing rocks.
We cut back to a scene where Major Samuels tells General Hammond that the time is up and it's time to seal the gate. But Hammond says we're going to hold off on that. We're not going to seal it just yet. Which kind of makes me think of something, because at the beginning of the episode, when he's talking to O'Neill about the mission from the movie, he mentions that he follows orders, saying that O'Neill didn't follow orders when he didn't blow up the gate. Now, if he got those orders from the president, that they only have 24 hours, it doesn't specify this, but if he had got those orders from the president, then he would not be following orders at this point. That's an interesting point to think about. But he holds off on it. While this battle is raging on the planet, which later we learn is called Chulak, kind of cuts back and forth between Earth and Chulak. Gets to the point where we can't wait any longer. We got to seal the gate. Hammond tells Samuels, all right, go ahead and give the order to seal it. Instead of just calling down to the control room, Samuels, he just walks. It's good that there's no emergency or anything at this point. But it gives them the time to basically defeat the Jaffa. Not completely. They get to the point where they're able to get through the gate. The refugees rescued from the prison, they're going through the gate as well to get out of the combat area. We see this giant villager guy, we call him Caveman in the commentary, grabs one of the Jaffa, puts him in this bear hug, and is basically squeezing him, and kills him. Somehow. Even though we've just learned earlier that Jaffa soldiers who have the larval Goa'uld have increased strength. But somehow this guy kills him. And the larval Goa'uld that was inside this Jaffa jumps into Major Kowalski, right to the back of his neck, as he's like checking on someone else who's wounded.
Once everybody makes it back to Earth, a couple things happen. The first is that Teal'c formally surrenders. He passes his staff weapon off to Samantha Carter. General Hammond recognizes who Teal'c was and says, "What the hell are you doing?" Rightfully so. He's your enemy. And Colonel O'Neill states, "This is the man who saved our lives. I would like for him to join SG-1."
Which says a lot
Yep.
about what he thinks of Teal'c now, which will be picked up later because General Hammond rightfully points out that
He was an enemy combatant.
and it's not your decision. So that's basically the end of the episode. There's a bit of reflection on what happened. Sharang and Skara are still out there. That's going to be a theme for a while, but there's an entire season waiting for us. The episode ends on one final note, and that is...
Kowalski's eyes glow.
And we will pick that up next episode. Bowhammer, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the military tactics used throughout the episode and what you noticed about the combat?
There are 3 groups of combatants that were in this episode. The first is the airmen and SG units. The second is the Abdojian militia. And the third are the Jaffa. I'm going to start with the Abdojian military because they are the shortest amount of time that I'll have to dedicate to this. The Abdojian military are untrained civilians given military-grade firearms, and it shows.
They're basically ancient Egyptians with assault rifles.
They have very little understanding of maneuver and cover. They're standing out in the open, shooting. They're not doing a very good job at inflicting casualties. We see that Earth's military, in the beginning, is doing much the same. They're moving in the opening while firing in that opening gate room sequence. And that's because they're airmen who aren't combat troops.
They're probably like maintenance guys. They're getting ready to transfer somewhere anyway, from what it sounds like at the beginning of the episode.
Exactly. And on that note, they grab weapons that are in a weapon rack, but they're already loaded, they have ammunition, and they are unsecured. We would never see something like this. On the Ranger, all of our weapons are locked up. We do see that the sergeant there has a sidearm, and it looks to be a M92 FS, or the military version, the M9. The SG teams also have issues that we discussed in the commentary, such as not effectively using cover. I covered most of them in the commentary, so I will move on to the Jaffa, which are the most interesting group on here. We see that the Jaffa are designed for one specific purpose, and that is as terror troops. They're not combat soldiers. They're not designed to fight a war. They're designed to rule by fear. And everything about them shows this. The serpent armor, the staff weapons. None of these are weapons of war or anything that you would equip a military force to fight with. They're all designed to inflict as much fear as possible.
They're not precision weapons. They're not any kind of effective military weapon at all.
And we see them especially in the dungeon fight. You have 2 individuals that are armed with staff weapons, Colonel O'Neill and Teal'c, fighting the Jaffa who are now trying to kill civilians. And instead of fighting the threat, they continue to kill civilians.
It's like maybe in the Jaffa afterworld, they get points for how many innocent people they killed.
Yeah, maybe it's their version of baseball.
Wow.
But we see all 3 factions surviving purely based off plot armor. None of them have even the most basic infantry skills, and none of them are up to par to actually fight in a galaxy that would have even the most basic understanding of military tactics. Flanking, covering fire, all of these basic ideas. Prime, what did we see with the one aeronautical scene?
Really not very much. They were using this ship. I don't know exactly what type of ship it is, but they did use it to attack ground targets, which is something that you would want. Basically trying to break up any kind of formations or squad movements, things like that. They weren't trying to do that, but once again, they were just trying to rack up as big a body count as they could. They actually got taken up pretty quickly by the surface-to-air missile.
There's really nothing more that can be said on it. There are 3 groups of mostly untrained people that wear the same uniform and point their guns in the same direction.
Let's talk about our characters a little bit. There's kind of a theme about people who are kind of directionless, but finding a direction towards the end and kind of moving on with their mission. Because when we first see Jack O'Neill, he's retired, he's divorced, he's staring at the sky. When he gets called back to duty, it gives him a new purpose, a new mission. Now, it's kind of on his shoulders to try and save the world. Same thing with Teal'c. Teal'c has been in this position where he's been forced to do things that he hates, he has no part of. because he doesn't have any other options. He's got nowhere else to go. And now this alien arrives who has the technology that may be able to take on the Goa'uld. And now he's got a direction to go. He can't go back home. He can't go back to his Jaffa barracks or anything like that after he breaks them out. So he's going to go to Earth. He's going to do what he can to help. Daniel Jackson, he's got a life on Abydos. I guess he's studying their culture. I'm sure he's gotten a lot of academic purpose out of studying the Abadonians, of studying this primitive culture. But now that his wife and his brother-in-law are taken, he's now on a mission to rescue them.
We also see character development in General Hammond. The first time we see him, he's a stereotypical general. Later in the episode, we see him soften up a little bit and open up to Colonel O'Neill. We see him start to trust the people who are under him and have more of an open mind in taking the recommendations and suggestions of those under him.
And he is also on his way out. He's months away from retirement, and this kind of gives him a new mission as well.
Exactly. And good character development takes time. This is only the first episode, and we've seen almost all of these characters grow leaps and bounds from where they started.
Now, after watching the episode, discussing the episode, and commenting on the episode, Fohammer, what are your thoughts on Children of the Gods as a whole?
As a whole, the episode is one of the best pilot episodes ever in any form of sci-fi. It introduces the show well, it introduces the cast, it shows what their acting abilities are like, and it makes you want to watch more. And I think that those are the three main things that any pilot should focus on. What about you? What are your thoughts on it, Prime?
I agree. I think it's a great pilot. Not one of the best pilots, but it does do its job well. Like you said, gives us a good introduction to the characters, also their mission, and it sets us off on a great adventure. We can go lots of places from there. In order to find out where they go from next, you'll have to join us again next time. It's a good thing we ended when we did. My console is showing me that we're receiving an incoming distress signal from an unidentified ship. So until next episode, when we cover Stargate Sg1 Episode 2, for Fohammer, this is Prime wishing you good navigating.